Greetings and welcome to online worship at Newtown Congregational Church for this November 26, 2023. It is Thanksgiving weekend, and sometimes Thanksgiving weekend, that Sunday, begins Advent. But this year, Advent doesn't begin till next Sunday. So it really is a Thanksgiving weekend with a little tip of the hat to Advent as we prepare ourselves to bring in that season of preparation for the birth of Jesus. I'm Reverend Matt Krebin, and I'm glad that you're with us for this online version. A couple of announcements for you. We are going to be receiving our once-a-month communion offering, both of non-perishable food items and any kinds of monetary donations for our own little hospitality hall food pantry program that we run out of our congregation to help folks serve as just a bridge, a day or two bridge for food resources, those who are facing some issues of food scarcity within our local community. So we'll be passing out bags in person at our on-site worship this Sunday. But if you are around or nearby and just couldn't be with us today, you can always stop by and we can get you a bag, and or just bring whatever bag you have handy and bring some non-perishable food items with you next week to help us with that once a month collection and ministry to help as we celebrate communion and give thanks at the table of Christ for all that is good among us. We also want to share that generosity that we have received from God and symbolically make sure the table is available for everyone to partake. Not just the table of Christ that we call communion, but the table of generosity, the table of love, the table of sharing. So that is happening. And then, of course, we are beginning Advent next Sunday as well. We hope you'll join us for that as we begin a new theme, which is God breaking in. The idea for us at Advent and Christmas time is that God breaks into our world. And sometimes God comes like a thief in the night, in quietness and in stillness. And sometimes God comes in ways that draw attention and surprise us and shock us. And the Christmas story is filled with a mixture of these things, that God is sometimes subtle when God comes into our world. And sometimes God breaks in with a potent and powerful light, or with angelic choruses, or all kinds of other things. So we're going to be playing with that theme in the coming weeks. We hope you'll join us for that. There are a number of other things happening with Advent and with Christmas time. There's some concerts coming up in our sanctuary that you might enjoy. There's also some opportunities for us to continue to grow in faith and help one another in our waiting and in our anticipation and to get ready for Christmas. In fact, we have a few things we're doing today on site for our Advent workshop, but those things are also available to you, at least some of them, in terms of if you are interested in getting ready yourself. We have some Advent calendar sheets that you can take and use to kind of help in your own preparations. They're little things you can do every day to try and help you get your heart and mind and spirit into the season, as well as some other items. So do look for that. And we're also collecting and supporting local families through presents and other things to make their Christmas special because they're facing some challenges. And we have information about that at the church. And so if for some reason you can't be around the church and pick up a card of something, getting a teenager a gift card of this kind, or somebody needs a coat or something else, if you're not able to do that in person, contact the church office, let us know, and we'll figure out how we might be able to get you to help with that, making a difference to local people through our faith community. And with that, I'm going to say we are going to continue with our time of worship. So let us gather in the Spirit of God, the one who calls us.
Community of Christ, who makes the cross your own. Live out your creed and risk your life for God alone. The God who wears your face, to whom all worlds belong, whose children are of every race and every song. Community of Christ, look past the church's door and see the refugee, the hungry, and the poor. Take hands with the oppressed, the jobless in your street. Take towel and water that you wash your neighbor's feet. Community of Christ, through whom the word must sound. Cry out for justice and for peace the whole world round. Disarm the powers that war and all that can destroy. Turn bombs to bread and tears of anguish into joy. When menace melts away, so shall God's will be done. The climate of the world be peace and Christ its Son. Our currency be love, and kindliness our law. Our food and faith be shared as one forever.
Make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak, and may the prayer of my heart always be, make me a servant, make me a servant, make me a servant today. Make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak, and may the prayer of my heart always be, make me a servant, make me a servant, make me a servant today. Make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak, and may the prayer of my heart always be, make me a servant, make me a servant, make me a servant today.
Today we conclude our fall study of the Exodus story, the story of Moses. We haven't covered all of Exodus, and we're still looking at how we might ponder whether we do some other things come the new year. But for now, we're gonna bring this to a close on this last Sunday before Advent with the story found in the book of Exodus, in chapter 20, which is really the giving of the Ten Commandments. And it's kind of a good place for us to stop because of what the Ten Commandments imply as we prepare to be those who welcome Jesus into the world, and Jesus who we profess as Christians to be the one we center our life in community around. Because the Ten Commandments really are not just rules, as we'll get into, but really a way for God's community to be manifest in a way that's different than what was happening with Pharaoh and the like. And so probably many of us know the story of the Ten Commandments. There have been movies, like the one with Charlton Heston in it. There have also been animated movies and stories. And of course we probably just have heard it, Moses gets the Ten Commandments, that are these big stone tablets, and there's details around that take place, the Ten Commandments, and what happens with the people and as they're waiting for Moses to come back from the mountain and other kinds of things. But the key here is really the giving of the Ten Commandments, and that's found in the 20th chapter. And so I'm going to read sections of that 20th chapter, verses 1 through 4, 7 through 10, and 12 through 17, because there's some commentary that extends this. But I think it's helpful for us to get most part of just the commandments, but also there's a little bit of commentary even still. And then we'll talk a little bit about what the implications of these Ten Commandments are, beyond just us kind of saying, oh, these are 10 rules that we just got to follow no matter what. That's probably not exactly what their intention was. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is Exodus 20, beginning with the first verse. Then God spoke these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses God's name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, you shall give that day, it is to the Lord, for it is the Lord's day, and you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or female slaves, your livestock, or any alien residents in your towns. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor shall you covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Here ends our reading. May God add understanding to these God's holy words. The covenant of Sinai, that's what the more extended version of the story we just read about, where we just read the Ten Commandments, is really a part of a much bigger covenant that we call Sinai, Mount Sinai. That's where Moses is with Yahweh. Goes up high into the mountain, Moses by himself, to receive this and then to pass it along to the people. Really from the 19th chapter of Exodus to the 24th chapter. And then if you go into the other books of the Torah, you actually find extended versions of the law, not just the Ten Commandments, but of a bunch of other laws as well. And so the Ten Commandments is sometimes called the Decalogue. If you know anything about decimal, is 10, right? So Decalogue, that is the 10, and is the book of the covenant. This is the covenant, and it is setting up the relationship that. Excuse me, I got a little itch in my eye. It is setting up this relationship between Yahweh and the people, this covenantal relationship. It really isn't just God saying, sit down, here are the rules, you better do what I say. This is how you're going to be a community. In fact, the laws themselves are symbols. Sometimes we think of the laws as just the laws, but the laws really are symbols. And in fact, these laws, these 10 Commandments, don't really lend themselves to practical use if you think about it, because in terms of being laws themselves, because there's actually not case law, as we're familiar with it. There's not, if you don't do this, this will happen, right? Or if you do this, you get this. If you break the law, this then goes on. Now, there's other parts where you have more formal laws, but the Decalogue here, the 10 Commandments, is really laying out a structure for a symbolic understanding of how to be the community in relationship with Yahweh. This covenant, a covenant is an agreement similar to a contract, but a contract very often, if one side breaks the contract contract can be null and void. But in a covenant, you are actually entering into a promise of relationship, often in spite of whatever other things happen and challenges that happen. Things may not go right totally, and yet you're still in a relationship. You still agree to continue on, even while you seek to sort out if something doesn't work right, and if one party has done something wrong. In this case, the covenant is oftentimes human beings making a covenant with Yahweh and Yahweh with human beings, and Yahweh keeps honoring the covenant, and human beings keep messing up. But Yahweh remains faithful. And thus, you have these symbols of the community. In fact, Walter Brueggemann, that scholar, I've mentioned him before, but one of the preeminent scholars of the Hebrew texts, he says that these, like the 10 Commandments, really are guidelines for the construction of a viable neighborhood. Guidelines for the construction of a viable neighborhood. If we're going to build the neighborhood of God, beautiful day in the neighborhood, like Mr. Rogers said. If we're going to build, a beautiful neighborhood and live in a neighborhood, we need viable. We need guidelines to make that neighborhood viable, and that's what Brueggemann says these are. And their strategies, in fact. Remember, I've been talking about this. If you've been following along at all, if this is the first time, you could go back and look at some of my other fall sermons. Remember, there's been this struggle between Yahweh and Pharaoh. Pharaoh's world, where Pharaoh lives, and where Pharaoh has control, and where the way of that world has violence and oppression, and not covenant. Is present in Pharaoh's world. And Yahweh's world is going to function differently. This neighborhood, this viable neighborhood, is going to look different. That's what's going on here. And Brueggemann goes on and he says, really, these 10 Commandments are, as he puts it, strategies for staying emancipated once you get away from Pharaoh. And remember, it's not just that the people want to go back. The people want to go back to Pharaoh, get back to Egypt. It's like very often you might adopt Pharaoh's world wherever you are. Hey, this is how Pharaoh ran things, so why don't we run it like that now? Wherever we are. You don't have to go back to Egypt to be enslaved by the system of Egypt. You got to have a new system, Yahweh's system, this emancipated system that you're a part of. And so Brueggemann says, the new strategy, first of all, says that you have to honor God. Really, the first 3 commandments, let me go this way, 3 commandments are really about honoring God, honoring Yahweh, to the exclusion of every other idol that can exist. And Brueggemann goes on, he says, and that includes every ism, such as racism or sexism or nationalism, or the worship of stuff that is rare or precious or attractive or beautiful or empowering. This is the challenge for human beings, and we need this strategy to remind us to say, you are here to worship, put Yahweh first, the relationship with Yahweh, the God of abundance, the God of love, of compassion, the God who wants to liberate you from all the things that will oppress you and oppress your family or your system. And that's what Pharaoh's world does. It stratifies and defines and oppresses others. And so the one of the strategies for defeating that is honor Yahweh. Honor Yahweh. And don't give in to all those idols. And in our day, those idols very often have, isms on the end of them. If you ever think about all the isms that are there, those are things that different sections of peoples will oftentimes worship at the expense of other things. And that even nationalism, the worship of the nation, if it is not living out this ideal of Yahweh, of fair treatment and of life, you don't just worship the nation because it's there. You seek to build a nation that is this community that you're building. And the same thing. So we have sexism. The idea that people are superior, and it's a constantly reinterpreted. In the ancient days, the peoples wouldn't have looked at it in the same way we did. Their cultural import and everything else. That's why Scripture comes alive, because it challenges us to say, what are the idols we have today or have had, and that we continue to wrestle with in different ways, and how are we going to not let those idols have power over us? Well, Brueggemann goes on and he says, the new strategy means that the Ten Commandments also takes the neighbor with utmost seriousness. So the last 5 commandments, if you hear about those last 5, what are they? They're all about the neighbor and treating neighbors with legitimacy and dignity and viability, especially disadvantaged neighbors, not to violate the neighbor for the sake of greed. Don't take your neighbor's stuff. This is neighborliness, right? You got the first 3 of Yahweh, and then you got the last, so you got the first 3 of Yahweh, and you got the last 5 are really focused on neighbor and on relationships with one another, and making those relationships to become viable, for a viable neighborhood, right? That's how you're going to have a viable neighborhood. And then in the middle, as he says, between those 3 and 5, there's 2 commandments on the Sabbath, taking the Sabbath seriously. And that's at the center of the 10 Commandments, in fact, is actually, Brueggemann says, is Sabbath. This is the Sabbath day, is Sabbath rest. Keep the Sabbath. Take a break from the rat race, from busyness and exhaustions, and do not let Pharaoh define your life. Pharaoh doesn't have Sabbath. In Pharaoh's world, there is no Sabbath. There is no rest. There is no time for rest. No rest for the weary. You got to keep busy. You got to get ahead. You got to do whatever you can. Don't rest. Because if you rest, you're going to fall behind. Sabbath. Yahweh rested on the 7th day, even of creation, even of the work of creation. God took rest. And thus we take rest as well. Brueggemann goes on and writes these words. He says, if we think about these 3 strategies in the 10 Commandments, each of them contrasts with the way of Pharaoh. Pharaoh believes that there are many loyalties, all of which enslave. Pharaoh believes there are no real neighbors, and Pharaoh never stops for Sabbath. It's 24/7. Moses on Mount Sinai with Yahweh declares that there are new possibilities for life beyond the pressures and anxiety and fearfulness and greed. So really we are building, the 10 Commandments are not about these rules that Yahweh sits down and says, you better be, don't you mess up, follow these rules, you're in trouble. It is, we're going to build a different world. This world of Yahweh that's going to look different than the world of Pharaoh. And the people are going to keep struggling, just like we're going to keep struggling. Some of the things in Pharaoh's world are still so attractive to us at different moments in our history and in our lives. We get really attracted to that stuff that Pharaoh has in that world, and we want to sometimes go back. And the contrast here is you're going to build this Yahweh's community, and you're going to use these as a means to build a viable way, to build a viable neighborhood, Yahweh's neighborhood, a beautiful neighborhood. And a realization for all of us that we can claim that connection to Yahweh. That Yahweh and Yahweh's ways are amazing and give us a life and a breadth, not only for ourselves, but for those around us, that we can live in shalom with other people, live in peace, build the peaceful kingdom, the beloved community. And that's when Jesus comes. That's when Jesus says, when Jesus arrives on the scene, and some say, oh, he's going to throw out all the law of Moses. Some people said that. He said, I didn't come to destroy the law. I came to fulfill it. Now, he didn't come to fulfill it by saying, you better follow every single little piece of the law. In that way, he's saying, you need to live out what the law was about. We're going to build the kingdom of God here, right now. We're going to be about building God's realm right now. So that's the message for today. It's a great message, for us to say we're going to become the community. We're going to build this community. We're going to claim our connections to one another as God's community, because that's what we do at Christmas time when we welcome the baby Jesus. We remember that Christ came that we might, that the world as we know it might be transformed, and that the community of which we are a part through Christ is God's community. And God is building that in this moment, not just in some future moment, and not some past moment, but right in this moment with us. So that's the message for the day. And I pray that God will bless you and keep you, and that God's face will shine upon you and be gracious unto you, and that the Holy One will look upon you with all kindness and give you peace. Amen.